Good evening, folks. I'm Joann. I'm here with my friend William John Cox, and we're here for our happy hour discussion, which some of you fine souls have been joining us for over the last few weeks. We're going to have a discussion about politics, philosophy, current events, and all while having a good sip of some Friday night libation. William, sound good?
Sounds
Let's
good.
get going. All right.
Cheers,
To
Joann.
you. Cheers to you. So what are we talking about now this week?
Well, as you mentioned, we've had more than 8,000 views of our talks in the last few weeks.
Hello, new
And so,
friends.
folks,
Hello.
if you like what you're seeing, please subscribe to our channel, and so that you'll get noticed whenever we post another of our discussions. Well, last week we talked about the Voters' Bill of Rights. We went over about the first 5 sections of it and sort of summarized those in a fairly quick discussion. And the comments that were made to last week's discussion asked for more information about the Voters' Bill of Rights and where it came from, where to get the information. So what I was thinking is that perhaps we could wrap that up this evening fairly quickly, the remaining sections of the Voters' Bill of Rights. But first, I thought what I might do is give just a quick bit of background as to how this all came about.
How this started.
Okay.
Are we going to go back to 1980?
No, this goes back even further. This goes back to 1979.
Oh, I was off by a year.
In 1979, my dear friend David Levinson was the editor of the local newspaper, and we would get together on evenings much like this, and we would talk politics and philosophy. And one night we were talking that I said, why I should I file a petition with the Supreme Court about this, and that's a splendid idea. He said, you should.
How many drinks did you have by that point?
Pardon? Oh, well,
how many drinks did you have by that point in the evening?
Oh, I don't know.
Question is the most brilliant ideas.
Probably had only had at least maybe one bottle or so. But anyway, he thought it was a splendid idea. So I filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court as a class action lawsuit directly in the Supreme Court, in which I said our government no longer represented the people. And that's what he encouraged me to do. Well, you don't do it quite easily. You end up having to actually have petitions printed. You have to go to a printer and have the petitions printed. So this is my original petition in 1979, in which I petitioned the Supreme Court.
You're such a renegade. I love it.
And the remedy I asked for was that we be allowed to vote in a national policy referendum every 4 years when we elect our president, so that we make policy. Well, of course, the Supreme Court did not hear my petition. But over the years, I continued to think about this and to write articles about it. And so in 2015, I published Transforming America, the book that I've shown before, that I still recommend as a good political history of the country, in which I discuss the Voters' Bill of Rights. And for the first time, I used that term, the Voters' Bill of Rights. And because there's other Voters' Bill of Rights. California has a Voter Bill of Rights, actually. So if you Google it, you would more likely get the California Voters' Bill of Rights.
Interesting. Okay.
That would be one thing. Then more recently, though, in 2018, I again filed another petition with the Supreme Court. This was during the Trump administration. I filed another petition with the Supreme Court.
The binding looks a little bit more slick this time.
But again, it was asking that we have our national policy referendum every 4 years. And the question I asked the court in 2018, I said, if it is true the American people are currently governed by a corrupt, ineffective, unrepresentative, and threatening government, do they have a reserved, inherent right of liberty to vote in a national referendum regarding the Voters' Bill of Rights in a peaceful attempt to recover, preserve, and better effectuate their democratic republic? Now, not only did the Supreme Court not here in my case, Justice Roberts instructed the clerk to not even allow them to be entered into the court. They were
So this time it didn't get stamped.
it didn't even get into the court. I mean, Roberts refused to allow it to even be lodged with the court, even as a First Amendment petition, because I sent it to each individual justice individually. And so the clerk was instructed to put them in an envelope and return them all to me. So I have them here. But again,
so at least in 1979, they actually stamped it and entered it into the record.
They actually issued an order about it in 1979. Because in 1979, the Los Angeles Times said that it was one of the 10 more interesting cases the court did not hear that year. But
really?
yes. So anyway, that's sort of the history of how this came about. And interestingly enough, where we left off last week, we talked about the University of the United States as incorporating all the service academies, but also to have academies for diplomacy, justice, transportation, but for all of the areas of government that require administration, that there be schools to educate young people in these areas, so that we have a professional body of representatives,
of civil servants,
of not just civil servants, but also to draw our representatives from, that our congressional representatives, state representatives, that we educate people in the nature of government. They spend their first 2 years learning the fundamentals of a free society and a freely democratic republic, so that they all come together with a same concept of a democratic republic.
So, this raises an interesting question that I've had, or never asked, but some of the people who've been elected to Congress, I mean, you have to, I have never worked in Congress. But you have to imagine that, like, if they have no background in it, if they're just kind of like, even like, okay, well, one of the presidential candidates would be an example of this as well. Getting into office and literally having really no idea about how it functions. I mean, like you say, it's a very interesting thing that you say about needing a pool of people to draw from to even represent us. I mean, because it actually isn't just like something where you just show up in Congress one day and all of a sudden you're able to manage all this legislation and understand what's going on in terms of the halls of Congress and how things function and what you need to do. I mean, in order to be an effective representative, you need to have some idea about how the place works and also about how legislation actually gets made. And so it's always been curious to me with some of these more interesting and outlandish folks who might get into Congress, like, do they have any idea what they're doing? I mean, and the answer is I don't know. But I mean, it's an interesting thing what you say about we need to create a pool of people to pull from for these very important posts. And so it makes me wonder how things are functioning now, frankly.
No. Well, they, particularly in Congress, the moment they're elected, they begin to run for re-election. That's their first priority, is to begin to raise money for the next campaign 2 years later. They have to run every 2 years. So it really it's almost dysfunctional from the outset for that reason, and also it takes them a year or so to even learn their way to get from their office to the floor of the Congress.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it's really, and also just to even, because you get all this like proposed legislation dumped on your desk. Do you even know how to interpret it or what to think of it? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, there's so many nuances and so many implications to how to implement a piece of legislation that you would need to have in order to evaluate it at all. So it's a curious thing to me. I think it's a very interesting point that I haven't thought of before, is what kind of skills do these people bring to the job to begin with? Anyway, so.
Okay, so we'll pick up from there, and the next section of the Voters' Bill of Rights is Section 10. And now, so one of I didn't describe the process by this. Over the years, as I thought about this and I began to write it, I would circulate copies of this through my correspondence, through various people that I corresponded with, and I would respond to their comments and suggestions as we finally fleshed this out. But the section that we will start with is answers this question: how do you get Congress to come up with the 12 most critical issues? How do you get them to articulate these to be on the ballot, on the presidential ballot? So this is what we came up with. During the calendar year preceding a presidential election, Congress shall solicit public comment regarding the political issues that most concern the people. Prior to the end of the calendar year preceding a presidential election, Congress shall adopt a joint resolution articulating questions regarding the 12 most critical policy issues to be addressed by the next president and Congress. Now, how do we get them to do this? Failure of Congress to adopt such a joint resolution prior to the end of such calendar year shall result in the disqualification of all sitting members of Congress to be eligible for re-election. It will be done. It will be done and stamped and out the door by December the 31st of that calendar year, because otherwise none of them would be able to be re-elected. The representatives in that election and half of the senators. And then 4 years later, the other half of the senators would or 2 years later would not be able to be reelected. So we would have a process by which we are given those 12 most critical questions for us to make our own policy. Federal elections shall be conducted every second year, shall be held on a national voters' holiday. A national holiday,
This will get a lot of support.
National paid holiday for all citizens who cast ballots. Federal elections shall be conducted. Now, this might not be uniformly accepted, but this is shall be conducted on uniformed, hand-countable paper ballots. And for the presidential election, ballots shall include the 12 most critical policy questions articulated by Congress, each to be answered yes or no. Paper ballots shall provide space, allowing voters to handwrite in their choice for all elected federal offices if they choose, and all such votes shall be counted. So it might take a while to have the election. We won't have the results by midnight on the night of the election.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, in other words, it is our way of taking control. This is our ballot. This is the most precious thing in our democracy.
But do you think that there's? I mean, I'm just thinking back over, like 4 years ago. Do you think that there's a risk of instability when it takes a long time? I mean, even a long time to determine who won the election?
Well,
frankly,
it might take a week or so. I mean, we're not talking months, but at least it's what it is. It's a way for each of us individually to say, this is my power. This is the only real power I have. It's my vote, and so I'm going to make sure that my vote is countable, and is accountable. That it is important, and yes, there are 300 million people in the country. I don't know how many voters there are, but it would take a while to tabulate the results. But that would be restoring the power back to the people, because now the networks call the election before the votes are all in, based upon their exit interviews.
Well, they can't call the election before the polls close, though.
No, not before the polls close, but the polls are closed certainly the votes are not all tabulated, and they are already calling the election. So and so
I don't know if you're ever going to stop that from happening,
no,
frankly.
perhaps not. And actually, exit polls may still be a very accurate way of determining the election. I mean, uh, uh, scientific polling is certainly something to be respected. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
there's a
Yeah,
value to it.
yeah.
But in any case, the idea is that
I like the idea of a holiday, though.
yeah.
The idea that people are supposed to go to work and vote on the same day. What are your thoughts about mail-in voting? I mean, do you really
Oh,
think
I
it's
think
like,
mail-in voting is fine as well.
yeah, okay,
I
yeah,
mean, certainly, I like the idea of going down to my local polling place and walking in and saying hello to everybody and going into a booth. But for years now, Helen, Naomi, and I have all sat down at the kitchen table with our ballots, and we vote together. The family that votes together stays together. Who do you think about this, or what do you think about this? We sit there, we mark our mail-in ballots together. We put them in the envelope and make sure that we sign them, do all the stuff we're supposed to do. So yes, I think a mail-in ballot is perfectly fine. It's still
yeah,
a paper
yeah.
ballot.
No, me too. I was just wondering if it was part of this sort
Okay,
of national holiday vibe. Okay, gotcha. All
next,
right.
without getting into it, the clauses 2 and 3 of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution is is repealed. That is the Electoral College.
Oh, you're repealing the Electoral College?
Yes, the Electoral
Oh,
College is
I'm
repealed
all about
by
it.
the Voters' Bill of
Oh,
Rights,
you had
and
me at hello.
then the amendment is that Congress shall determine the dates of the primary and general elections of the president and vice president, which dates shall be the same throughout the United States. The presidential and vice presidential candidate receiving the most popular votes by all citizens of the United States shall be elected.
Okay, so we need to have a discussion here about the Electoral College
Okay.
because I I have a big problem with the Electoral College and everything. However, if you get rid of the Electoral College and it's just the straight popular vote, you're really going to have a lack of attention paid to the rural parts of the country. I mean, you're just not. I mean, politicians, if they're really only going for the popular vote, they're really only ever going to go to the cities. Like they will never, and not just campaign to the cities, but they're not even going to deal with issues that deal with the rural areas, right? Because they don't. While I have a problem with the Electoral College because of how there's been a movement of population around the country, and you have many more people on the coast now, and it feels more and more like lopsided than ever in terms of the popular vote and the electoral vote. At the same time, I do see that there is an issue around how you still have politicians pay attention to these less populated parts of the country that still matter, but there's a likelihood without the Electoral College that they'll be completely ignored politically. What do you think?
I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I don't know how else to. In other words, you can have. I mean, there are initiatives that require the electors to follow the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you're back to a popular vote.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem you have is that the president is and vice president are the representatives, the sole representatives of all the people of the country. And
Right.
so they should be elected by all of the people, all citizens of all the country.
Is part of the issue because the number of electoral votes per state have not been updated? Is that part of the issue?
No, that's not necessarily the issue. It is that you can have a situation just like what we had on January the 6th,
Where you have like this bogus set of electors type
it's
of
like
thing.
this is there was we are not electing our president. These electors are electing our president, and here we had all of these false
Yeah.
slates being brought in, and there are there are all kinds of scenarios that you can imagine by which the electoral college could elect a president who is certainly rejected by a vast majority of the people of the country. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and it can come down to a vote in the House of Representatives or a vote in the Senate for the vice president. I mean, that's not a real representative government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, I agree. I'm just trying to think through how it will change,
Yeah.
how things are done.
Well, these are all
Yeah,
good and valid
fair enough.
arguments,
Yeah.
and certainly a subject.
I mean, that was the reason why it was put in the Constitution in the first place, right? I mean, like because you had parts of the country that wanted to make sure that they maintained sufficient representation. But now we have a situation where things are so lopsided and where you can have a person winning the electoral college who hasn't won the popular vote. So then you have really not an equality of the vote across the country. My vote in my state is not worth the same amount as the vote in the other state. And that can't be good for democracy. Just can't be.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Right.
So
okay, there we have it.
Is that everything?
No, we have another section. Okay, this has to do with the revolving door of lobbyists. You come in and you serve a term, and then you go about and you come back in lobbying to the people you formerly worked with. So no person having previously served as an official of the federal government, whether elected, appointed, employed, or serving in the military, shall engage in any employment to advocate an interest or position to any government official for a period of time following such service equal to the period of such service.
Oh, funny. I like that.
For 20 years in Congress, 20 years later, you can come back and lobby Congress. But in the meantime, you can't. And then deals with the bribery of lobbying. No person advocating an interest or position to any government official, whether or not for pay, shall offer or provide any campaign contribution, gifts, or things of value, including favors, services, travel, meals, entertainment, honorarium, and promises of future employment to such government official, nor shall such official accept any such proffering. Restrictions imposed on such persons by this section shall not be deemed to violate the rights of free speech or petition for redress.
Look at
Get
this.
lobbying out of government. It's just blatant bribery. It is. It is so incredibly corrupting. That's how we end up, with the inability to pass laws that provide the safety of people in this country, because of the industries that don't allow laws to be passed that affect their profit margin. It's worth it for them to. Okay, it's like Trump, this week went before the oil executives. He brought all these oil executives down to Mar-a-Lago, and
God.
And he asked them. He said, "You need to put up $1 billion. I need $1 billion from you people."
My God.
and then you'll be able to drill.
Oh,
I mean, now that's just,
could it be more blatant, more crude, more gross? I mean, yeah, yeah, I mean,
but then by the
but
same
I
token,
want to say this
by the
about
same token, Biden is allowing them to extend the drilling as well. In other words, it's not as blatant as that, but there is still that
But wasn't he
element taking
like,
place
no, no,
even
but
with the
he was
Democrats.
hogtied by some prior agreement, but then he actually rolled it back and said no. And then I can't remember what happened there, but it was like there's an attempt to kind of, because he was hogtied by this prior agreement that the government like made um legally. But let me just back up there about lobbyists in general. Um we like to call people lobbyists who are advocating for things that we don't agree with. But there are people who do the exact same activity, promoting things and advocating for things in Congress that we do agree with.
Right.
And they're lobbyists too. Like people who
And provide
are.
a very valuable service.
So I'm just saying the word lobbyist is a dirty word, except when it's applied to something that we want Congress to do. And we want, unions have lobbyists, reproductive rights people have lobbyists, like it's not all like oil and gas people who are trying to, bribe people. Lobbyists is a phenomenon of, it's just like a representative to try to make your case with Congress. And we don't like how a lot of business gets done, but I think we should face that it's not just one side doing the business. I mean, like, it's across the board, all kinds of issues. Some issues we support have lobbyists. And if they didn't have lobbyists, they'd be dead in the water.
And they provide a valuable service. In other words, there is a service from lobbyists who can provide background information and research on important issues. So, I mean, this doesn't affect any of that. I mean,
This is just about whether
it
they
just
can
takes the
be in
money,
government.
takes the bribery out of the equation, is all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Gotcha.
Okay. Now, this is the final section. No member of Congress, federal judge, or federal official shall vote or rule on any matter in which such person or their spouse, domestic partner, child, or contributor of more than minor amounts of campaign funds has a financial, legal, or beneficial interest.
You're gonna have to define minor.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what is minor, but I think that at least it provides a word that has a meaning. Minor means little.
Right. There are things you can't call minor, like.
So basically, that's it. That's the Voters' Bill of Rights, and again, it requires the whole package to really, if we're really going to transform this government, which is what we're talking about, is to transform this government into one that truly represents the people that elect it. That is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's the promise that Lincoln made, and that's what we must achieve if we are to succeed. I mean, we unless we do this, Joann, we are not going to survive this century. We have to evolve to have an effective government to deal with these massive issues that are confronting us, because right now it is just simply locked up. It is not producing any meaningful legislation at all to deal with the big issues.
I think that there is some legislation being produced that's helpful, but I agree with you that it's not happening on the scale nor at the speed that it needs to be happening. And that is actually part of what we are seeing with the kind of frustration and just general fed upness from younger people, because they are the ones more than us who are going to have to deal with these issues in a much deeper way. And so doesn't mean, it depends on what your age group is and, how long you think you're going to be on this mud ball. But I think the bottom line is that people who are much younger in their 20s and whatever, college campuses, they look at this and they're like, well, it's very clear that the environment and it's very clear that climate change is going to be dramatically worse in my lifetime, you know? And we don't have, and do we have a government that has the balls to do what needs to be done? And what I see is from where I sit, which is inside of a specific government machine in some ways, but what I see when I look at it, I see willingness to move the needle a bit, but not to do anything too uncomfortable. That's what I see. Now I actually think Biden is in a number of things. And I actually think that maybe because of his age, he feels like, what the hell I'm going to do? He does push the envelope, and I like that about him. But I do see in a lot of different ways that there's enough sort of rote politics in play that has been the way it's been for a while, where people haven't actually broken out of that like more careful mode that we're going to balance things and we're going to like find the middle path or whatever. And I know that we need to do that in some ways, but I don't see, even from politicians that are very comfortable in where they sit, and they're not going to be, it's not like they're going to lose re-election or something. There's still a hesitation to be bold about some, when it comes to having to make decisions that are going to make that are necessary but going to be uncomfortable. And so that's what I see.
Well, one of the values of having the policy referendum, of having the people make
it gives
the
people
policy,
cover,
is that it gives them cover because
to really pursue stuff.
Knows every time they make a decision they lose votes. I mean, that's how they don't necessarily look at it as how they're going to gain votes. They look at it as how they're going to lose votes. And if they take action on too many things, they will have lost everybody, because on one thing or another they will lose the election if they are proactive. But if we evolve the government to one in which we propose the policy to them and we elect representatives to effectuate our policies, then they are more likely to be collaborative and to work together and to reach compromises and to act the way that a democratic republic is supposed to act.
Because it won't feel as risky.
Right.
Yeah. It won't be as risky.
They'll be doing what they were told to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
They're
following
instead of them coming
a mandate. They have a mandate.
My policy, elect me, and this will be my policy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different kind of concept of government.
It is. It really is. And I guess one question I have left is, do we feel like the voters, I mean, do we feel like voters have the capacity and the sophistication, frankly, to make these policy demands?
Well, again, earlier we talked last week about the role of government to provide the information, that accurate information for people. A part of a role of government should be to investigate these circumstances and to arrive at unbiased conclusions as to risk and the value of different concepts, whether it's energy or electric cars or whatever the subject is. There should be a fair and accurate investigation to obtain the facts, and that they should be put together into packages for public consumption. Like we talked about earlier, the white papers that, like the British government puts together from time to time.
But they don't put those together for a public audience. They put them together for like policy
I know
wonks,
they
right?
do.
And
Yeah.
so if we're really talking about having something that's actually like a public level referendum on policies, I mean, do we think that the regular voter will be able to understand, consume, and produce a meaningful vote on which policies or what types of policies for the government to pursue? And do they, and that's my question about it. I mean, in terms of how, for people who don't actually spend their daily lives thinking about government policy, um, you know, putting this in a format that can be digestible and actually generate a real sort of like evaluation on their part is a big deal. I mean, like, and I think that, we also have to think about, yes, it's on the government to put out this information. Yes, it's on the government to produce these white papers, but
And also keep in mind that another section of the Voters' Bill of Rights requires the broadcasters to provide equal time and fair uh, uh, presentation of issues. And also, if you get the money out of politics, if you get the money out of it, then you won't be having all of the negative ads. This could not be done presently. Presently, it would be very difficult to have something like this because it would just be
eaten alive by like negative. Yeah, it would be
it would just be 30-second ad after ad after ad, on
bashing it,
or yes on no, or no on yes, back and forth.
It's just like the propositions, right? I mean, like the propositions just become a morass of, you're trying to figure out like what's so with the propositions. And I mean, oh yeah.
And I agree. I think that that referenda makes terrible law. You don't want to make law by referendum. You want to make
policy priorities
make a different is a policy is the overall policy guidance of the government.
And this is like once every 4 years.
Right.
Would it be on the same year? Would you do it the year before? Like, how would you stagger it with like a
presidential election?
So it's with the presidential election.
Right.
When you vote for the president, you vote for the policies.
Right. And the candidates are there. Oh, I remember what it was that we were supposed to do. If we're finished with this somewhat.
We are. I think I know what we were supposed to do. I didn't do it. But did you do it?
I did. I attempted. Let me put it.
Let's hear about it.
We have 2 congressional offices in Long Beach, in our city. We have, we're in 2 different districts, and I contacted both of the congressional offices and asked them if they supported the Voters' Bill of Rights and gave them the information and so forth and so on. I've not heard back from them. And I also, they're both Democrats, both of these office holders. And I contacted the Republican opponents that is running against them in the election in November, because we've had our primary now. So we've identified
the 2 candidates,
the other 2 candidates, asking, and I went to their websites and posted it in their contact form, the same thing. So I haven't heard anything back, but I did do that in a rush today when I realized that we had promised to do it. So while you were working faithfully, I was cheating and
no, that's not cheating. That's not cheating at all. I'm glad you did it. I need to recommit.
It is an effort. I was actually able to get someone to answer the phone, in one of the offices, who was quite nice and actually took down all the information.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Said someone would get back to me about this. So
you did. So you contacted like federal level representatives. So
Right,
that's what we should be doing is federal level, because this is a federal level proposition. So
right.
we should do a federal
I mean,
level.
that's what we talked about is that Congress itself has the greatest
Right.
vulnerability to a grassroots movement to
Right.
affect Congress in that way.
Okay. Okay. So I need to recommit. He showed me up. I need to recommit. Okay. So I'm going to reach out. I'm going to
So
reach out to,
what
I'll
else is
report
going
back
on?
next week.
What else is going on in the world you want to talk about? Anything at all?
Well,
Real
I
quick?
mean, just a little, I mean, just to touch on something, because I think we've had a pretty meaty discussion already, but I was just thinking about this, in terms of politics and everything in this election year. And I heard an NPR piece tonight about how they've done the evaluation, the CPI evaluation of, the value of the basket of goods for the regular consumer, and has it gone up? And it's a way of like looking at pricing versus salaries and pricing versus. So actually it was interesting because they said, despite what everybody thinks, it's like actually that our what we're being paid, but what salaries are, wages are more than keeping in line with the value of goods and the increase in the price of goods. So essentially, what they're trying to say is that this whole inflation conversation is not as dire as some people are making out to be. But it brought me to this, was just about the economy and politics. And here we are in an election year, and we think a lot about foreign affairs, and we think a lot about like democracy. But the bottom line is a lot of what drives the outcome of an election is the economy. And is it, and I guess when I was thinking about it, is it the economy really, or is it the perception of the economy? Or is it about what we're told about the economy, or what we're told how to? So it made me just start thinking about that tonight, because obviously we all have our, if you've lost your job and you're in debt and you can't pay your medical bills, you have a very stark experience of the economy that obviously is probably going to influence what you think about what's going on politically. And that makes total sense. But I think there's a number of people who just kind of go about their lives and they perceive that things have changed a certain way. And that very much informs what they think politically. But I wonder how much we really understand about what's happening economically, and how much that's kind of like almost a boondoggle in terms of how we perceive what's going on politically, and how much it drives the political outcomes when in a way I'm not even sure it's accurate. So
Right.
all that to say, that's kind of a hash, but I think about two things when I think about the current discussion of the economy. One of them is inflation, and the other one is the interest rate. And they're obviously very much connected. And the perception people have right now about the economy, what this news report was saying, is that may not actually be their experience of what the economy is. So,
Well, yeah, that's really the only real influence that the government has over the economy is the Fed, the Federal Reserve, that sets the interest rate, and that's really, even though that's not really the government, those are the
no,
banks. I mean, that's those are all bankers that do that. There, and so, and that's really sort of a like an axe, instead of a scalpel, it's like an axe in a way, because they're trying to deal with inflation by raising the interest rates, and so, but I think when you talk about elections and politics and the economy, you always get, well, what's the price of gasoline? Well, the president has very little to do with the price of gasoline. Um,
yeah,
you know, that has to do with the fact that Mexico is no longer um, supplying oil to the United States, or different, there's different things that are taking place, or the fact that oil is not being shipped through the Suez Canal now because of things that are going on there. There's a lot of things that can deal with the price of gasoline.
yeah.
And
Yeah, and there's this thing that the president gets too much of the credit and too much of the blame for the
Right.
economy, you know? It's like it doesn't really, but this is like how, but the disturbing thing is this seems to be how elections are won or lost, right?
Well, we have to move away. Okay, in ancient Rome, under when Rome was a republic, they before it became the empire with emperors, they would if they had a crisis, the Senate would elect a dictator, and the dictator would be in control of the government for 1 year to deal with the crisis, to give the power to one person to deal with the crisis. But then it would go back to the Senate generally to be making the laws that control the country. And
Hmm.
so we evolved, Rome evolved from that to having emperors who became gods,
Mm.
that were deified. And that's sort of where we are today, is that our own government has evolved from where during a crisis our president was given extraordinary powers. During the Civil War, the writ of habeas corpus was suspended, among other things, and during World War II, we rounded up all of the Japanese citizens and put them in concentration camps. Uh, there were these crises that arose after 9/11. We gave extraordinary powers to the government, which they still have, and we've got to the point now where our election, if you look at what's going on, is between these two individuals, you know. And a lot of people on one side don't like this person, and a lot of people on this side don't like this person, and that's the problem, is that it's our government itself that has failed, and that instead of fighting out this election as to whether we elect this person or this person who's going to come in and solve the problems, neither one of them are going to solve the problems until we evolve this government to be the kind of government that is required to deal with these complicated problems now and in the future. They're only going to get more difficult and more complex in the future. It's not going to become simpler. It is a very, very complex world we live in that requires a high degree of complexity in the manner in which it is governed. And I've said it before, there's nothing more exciting to me than to fly into a city at night and to look down at the lights as you first start coming into the city, and you fly, and particularly in LA. I mean,
Yeah,
fly
sure. The grid.
you
Yeah,
fly for you fly for half an hour, over the city before you land at
it's a
LAX.
marvel. It's a marvel. Yeah.
Yes, it is. I mean, and the fact that we are able to do this is just a masterful thing that requires a, a huge amount of cooperation. We couldn't do this unless we did it together. And so when you raise a good point, are the voters really ready to take on this responsibility? Well, I think if they had the responsibility, they would rise to the occasion. If they really knew they would make a difference, they would, they would actually, there would be seminars. The political parties could, you could go to YouTube and you could look there. There would be tutorials on the various subjects. There's a lot of ways that the information could be presented that would help educate people. But I believe I had dinner the other night with a couple and their daughter. They were on their way to Hawaii, and they stopped in LA on their way to have dinner with us. And the daughter is in her last year of college, and is a biologist studying biology and mathematics. And I was talking to her, saying, this is your future. You are who I talk to, and everything I do, I'm talking to you. And of course, here she is, 21 years old or whatever, and she's saying, well, but this younger generation, are more frivolous. They're not as serious as we are. So
Oh, funny.
so you always have this, but it is true that the future is theirs. And if we did anything in these talks, if we could start getting more young people attracted to listening to what we have to say,
Hmm.
it would be really reassuring. So if any of you are young people, please post a comment. And if you like what you're seeing, give us a like.
Give us a like.
Give us a like and share this with others. And if you can, again, I guess we're wrapping this up.
We're wrapping it up. Yep, but it's been a good chat.
Yes, it has been. So if you
show them the book one more time.
Oh yes, I have to show the
Show
book.
the book one more time.
But yes, go to the website, williamjohncox.com.
Or lift it up a little bit.
For free. If you like the book, you can go to Amazon. You can get it for cost. If you are interested in the philosophy of the book, the Mindkind philosophy, it is there at mindkind.info. And certainly go to, if you have any questions about the Voters' Bill of Rights or what we're doing here, you can go to thevote.io. And what you will see there is an American flag that has a golden stripe on it from one corner to the upper corner to represent the people of the United States. So,
all right.
Cheers
My
to
glass is empty, but
cheers to all of the people.
I had a good time drinking it with you.
And may your consent to be governed never be taken for granted.
Never, and we should never take it for granted. All right. Cheers, William. Cheers.
See you next week.
See you next week.